Hi everyone. As Dennis said, my name is Dearbhala Ledwidge and I'm the Heritage Officer with the County Council. So my role is around heritage policy, advice, guidance, protection, a big range of gambit. And I'd also work with my colleague Evelyn Graham, who's the Conservation Officer, so there'll be some overlap between both of our roles. And I suppose what I'm here, as Dennis said, to talk to you tonight is just to give you a little overview of what heritage means for the county, particularly in relation to the county development plan. So hopefully it will inform the discussion around heritage in the county development plan. So the three main things that I want to cover, it's a very brief presentation, is firstly to look at what is heritage. The second is what aspects of heritage are covered in the existing county development plan, and I've gone back to the existing one so that a lot of people, I'm sure, have never actually maybe even opened up county development plans, so you may not be familiar with what's actually in a development plan in relation to heritage. So I thought it might be useful to go back to the existing one and just see the scope of things that are covered. So it might then stimulate the discussion about what people feel should be carried forward into the next one. And then I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of typical heritage policies that we have in the existing heritage plan. Again, just to kind of stimulate discussion. It's not to say that these have to be exactly the same policies going forward, but it's just to give you an idea of what is there. So firstly, what is heritage? Well, you can see from that slide, massive amount of words. It's a really, really broad topic. And I suppose my job is the work that I do is defined largely by the definition of heritage in the Heritage Act 95. And I think there's something like 18 different aspects to heritage in that. Broadly, you can group it into three main headings: built heritage, natural heritage and cultural heritage. And within that you've got everything from archaeology, monuments, architecture, to landscapes, seascapes, wildlife, flora and fauna. And then in Kilkenny we've added in a few of our own which aren't actually in the legal definition. We've included local history and folklore because we think they're very important. That's what people will often really connect with, so that's also included in our definition of heritage. And I suppose ultimately that's a very broad definition, but it's really what makes Kilkenny unique, and it's what gives it its sense of place, and it's what people connect to, and that for me is what's so important about heritage. So looking back at the existing county development plan, as Dennis said, it goes from 2008 to 2014, and heritage in that plan is broadly broken down into three groups. So we've got natural heritage, built heritage and landscape. And I just want to give you an overview of how each of those are dealt with in the development plan. So we'll start with natural heritage, or biodiversity. I'm sure some of you have come across that word. And each of these headings that I'm going to look at is a heading in the development plan. I should say it's actually Chapter 8 of the development plan is where heritage is, if any of you want to go home and read it afterwards. The first area is designated sites, and what this is that sites of nature conservation value which are protected because they're important either from a national or an international level. And that would include, for example, the River Nore, the River Dynan, which is a tributary of the Nore, obviously, because they're both special areas of conservation. They're important at a European level for the species that they contain and the habitats that they contain. We also have policies around protected species, so this could be plant or animal species that again are either of national or international importance, so therefore there is actually legislation, national and international legislation to protect them. And in Kilkenny, maybe two particularly nice species or maybe well-known species would be the salmon and the kingfisher. And actually the River Nore was just recently designated as a special protection area in addition because of the kingfisher habitat on it. It's obviously very important for salmon also. And then, so those two are really looking at sites and species that are nationally or internationally important, but we also have species and habitats that are important just from a local level, stuff that you find around in the wider countryside. So we have policies in the county development plan to protect those too. We also have policies around preparing a Kilkenny Biodiversity Plan and a Kilkenny Heritage Plan, and we have both of those plans in place. They're quite different to a development plan. They're really action plans, and they're implemented by the Kilkenny Heritage Forum, and the chair of the forum, Councillor Catherine Connery, is here with us this evening. We also have policies around sites of geological importance. And the photograph I have here, you probably recognise it, is taken from Dunmore Caves. So these are geological sites of county importance in Kilkenny, and we have a list of 18 with a few new additions to come to it this year of those kind of sites. Policies again for woodland, trees and hedges, because obviously they're very important for biodiversity. They act as corridors and habitats for a number of species. Historic gardens and designed landscapes are also a very important part of our natural and our cultural heritage. And there's a photograph here of Woodstock. We'd also have policies for Mount Juliet and also the Discovery Park, to name just a few. Again, policies for rivers, streams and wetlands, because they're very important habitats for a range of different species. So then, just to give you a couple of examples of policies that are in our existing plan, just to show you the type of thing that we're trying to protect through the development plan. And I just chose these randomly. They're not necessarily the most important ones by any means. The top one there is, so the policy is to assess all proposed developments which are likely to impact on designated natural heritage sites. So that's the SACs that I was talking about earlier. Another policy we have is to retain hedgerows and other distinctive boundary treatments such as stone walls when undertaking, authorising or approving development where possible. So that's just an example of two types of policies that the Council has put in place for natural heritage. So then just moving on quickly to landscape. Landscape is a much smaller section in the development plan, and it looks at three main areas: areas of high amenity, views and prospects, and landscape character assessments. And just a very quick example of a landscape policy from the development plan would be to preserve and improve places or areas from which views or prospects of special amenity value exist. And then finally moving on to built heritage. Built heritage is quite a large section. As you can imagine, there's quite a range of things that are covered within the definition of built heritage in the development plan. It includes archaeology, which typically would be anything kind of pre-1700, and then architecture often is kind of post-1700. They're kind of arbitrary definitions, but they're useful. And the photograph down on the left-hand side there just shows an archaeological dig. I'm sure a lot of you would be familiar with that. And that archaeology can include anything from churches, graveyards, towers, mottes, a huge range of different things. Historic graveyards, again, very important part of both our built, natural and cultural heritage, and it's probably the one area that I get the most phone calls and comments from the general public on. People feel very, very strongly about historic graveyards, and I've no doubt a number of you here are probably involved in some way in maintaining or caring for your historic graveyards. Then on to architecture and the built heritage, and this is an area that Evelyn Gray, my colleague, the Conservation Officer, would deal quite a lot with. And the two areas under this where we have policies in the development plan is in terms of the record of protected structures, which is basically a list of buildings which are very important from an architectural or other reason within the county. And so for that reason they've actually been identified and added to the list, and they have a level of protection around them. And then in addition to that, we have what are called architectural conservation areas. So they're areas within towns or villages or within the city which are deemed to be of heritage value because of some specific feature of the architecture. So it'll normally be maybe a street or a cluster of buildings, but it's a larger area than just one building, and that's what an ACA or architectural conservation area is called. Other parts of built heritage then, townscapes, street furniture, and that can be anything from hand pumps to the old letterboxes that you see around, the old green letterboxes, maybe a stile on an old stone wall, roadside features, cultural heritage features. The photograph there, sorry, it's not very good, but the one on the bottom left is of the rag tree on the Kells Road. I don't know if some of you would be familiar with it, but that's a very important part of our cultural heritage, where people will go along and tie the rag and make a wish. And those are the types of things through some of our policies that we'll be trying to protect as well. And obviously then vernacular built heritage, looking at our old vernacular, whether it's farm buildings or patch buildings. So it's not just all about the big houses, but we're also very keen to protect and conserve the vernacular heritage. And then finally, the last two aspects of built heritage that we deal with in the existing development plan are floodlighting of old buildings, because obviously that has impacts for the building and maybe even for the natural heritage if there's bats living there, for instance, and we have policies around that, and also the naming of places. And the photograph that I've included there is a shot from a survey we are working on at the moment, a heritage audit of the River Nore, where we've worked with the anglers along the River Nore to gather the place names of the river, and that's being done for the whole of the River Nore. So that just gives you an idea of the range of heritage items that are addressed in the existing plan, and then just moving on finally to examples of policies for built heritage in the plan. The first one there is to require an appropriate archaeological assessment to be carried out in respect of any proposed development which might affect either a recorded monument or a zone of archaeological protection. And for example, in Castlecomer, there is a zone of archaeological protection around the centre of the town. So what that policy means then, if there's going to be any development that's likely to impact on archaeology, the person doing that will be required to complete an archaeological assessment. And then just another example there of a policy is to protect and enhance historic items of street furniture and roadside features as appropriate. So that's kind of in a nutshell how heritage is addressed in the existing plan. So hopefully it'll give you some ideas for discussion about how you might like to see it addressed in the next one. And what I've done, similar to what Dennis has done, is just maybe giving you a few points to consider for when we break down into our groups. I suppose the first question I have there is heritage important to Castlecomer and to the county in general? And if it is, which particular aspects are most important that people feel about? If people don't feel it's important, maybe you could tell us why that is, and what other aspects do you consider more important? Is heritage something that should be protected or not? If it should be protected, which particular parts of heritage should we be protecting? And do you have any suggestions for how this should be done through the county development plan process? If you don't feel heritage should be protected, maybe you could give us your reasons for that. That would be useful for us to know. And what would be recommended then in the county development plan to reflect this, that it wouldn't be protected? And so with that, that's my presentation. Thanks very much.